When I woke up on Sunday morning and read the news of this terrible massacre on the first night of Hanukkah in Sydney, Australia, a couple of things went through my mind. The first is about the nature of Jews in Australia, and the second is about the nature of Hanukkah. I've had the good fortune of spending a fair amount of time in the Jewish community in Sydney and Melbourne, and it's the Australian Jewish community is one of the most extraordinary that I've ever seen anywhere in the world. It's a very, very cohesive Jewish community, very, very vibrant, very strong dedication to Jewish education. And it's different than the American Jewish community in that it is closer to the European experience. Most American Jews came to the US in the late 19th or early 20th century. Many Australian Jews came later, before or after the Holocaust. And so you have a much larger percentage of families in Australia that are the direct descendants of people who survived the Holocaust, with many, many families being touched very, very deeply by that experience. It is really a community that is more, I think, affected, more closer to, more traumatized by the experience of the Holocaust than almost any other Jewish community on earth. And so for a community that has that deep trauma in so many Australian Jewish families to now have this new trauma, this terrible, terrible massacre that killed, we now know, 15 people on the first night of Hanukkah is just, it's just horrifying beyond words. The second thing is about the fact that it happened on Hanukkah. When I read the news, I was reminded that there's not a lot of discussion about Hanukkah in the Talmud, but in the relatively brief discussion there's a discussion in Tractate Shabbat about the nature about the mitzvah to put the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah lamp, um, in the entrance to one's house. And the rabbis say that the mitzvah, the obligation is to put the Chanukiah, the lamp, in the window so so it is visible to the public. But then they say that the sages say that in a time of danger, in a time of religious persecution, when Jews are not allowed to perform the mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah lamp, it is permitted to place the Chanukiah on the table instead, so it can't be seen from outside. And so it was this very, very poignant to think about this discussion in the Babylonian Talmud against the backdrop of this experience in Sydney, Australia, which it did turn out to be extremely dangerous, deadly, actually, to perform the mitzvah of publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah. And that the rabbis close to 2,000 years ago were worried about this very issue. Could Jews safely celebrate Hanukkah, publicize the mitzvah of Hanukkah, or did we need a special dispensation to say that in times of grave danger, that Jews can perform the Hanukkah ritual, the celebration in private? And so to me, that seems to me in some ways kind of one way of thinking about what is at stake today in a world of rising anti-Semitism. Do we live in a world in which it is safe for Jews to light Chanukiahs in public, and as the rabbis prefer, to publicize the miracle that happened, that we celebrate on Hanukkah? Or do we live in a time of such great danger that that Jews should have to do so in private because the risk of doing what those Australian Jews did on the first night on Bondi Beach in Sydney is actually too dangerous? I'm sure that the response by Jewish communities around the world will be to double down on the obligation to publicize the miracle, perform the celebration of Hanukkah in public, to not be daunted, to not be scared by this. But it is terrible. It is terrible to imagine that there might be some who actually now need to go back to the Talmudic discussion about whether it's safe, in fact, to light a Chanukiah, given now that we've seen this terrible, terrible massacre in Sydney. It shows that we still live in a world that is dangerous for Jews, and that some of the ancient discussions about how to keep Jews safe are still relevant today. And that some of the terrible, terrible horrors that many Australian Jews faced, the anti-Semitism in their families in Europe, that in a different way, that anti-Semitism has returned in Australia and on Hanukkah of all holidays.